6. SS President Coolidge. The history of SS President Coolidge goes back to 1931 when it was launched. The President Coolidge was a luxury vessel at the time and was the largest passenger ship in the United States. It was 615 feet in length and could carry over 1,200 passengers and 300 crew members. President Coolidge's time as a luxury vessel was cut short when the United States entered World War II. That was when it was converted into a troop transport ship. The boat was redesigned for war and was upgraded so that it could transport 5,000 troops. The vessel was then exclusively used in the Pacific Theater during the war. It had some memorable voyages, including a 1942 trip where it transported the President of the Philippines to San Francisco. And it was October of that year when President Coolidge transported a ship full of troops from San Francisco to New Caledonia, which is located south of the Solomon Islands. The boat then sailed to Vanuatu, which is situated north of New Caledonia, where tragedy struck. President Coolidge hit some mines in shallow water when it reached a certain spot in Vanuatu, forcing the crew to abandon the ship. Over 5,000 men were evacuated, and surprisingly, there were only 2 casualties reported. The ship sank to its watery grave, but today the wreck is a popular location for sport divers and tourists alike. 5. USS Massachusetts. When it comes to the worst warship in US history, look no further than the USS Massachusetts. This 350-foot battleship was launched in 1893, and a crowd of some 15,000 people showed up to see the mighty vessel in person. The spectators were hoping to see what could be the crown jewel of the US Navy, but instead they were looking at the lemon of the US Navy. So what went wrong? The Massachusetts was built at a time when the United States wanted to upgrade its fleet. To be a major power, you need the best weapons. So, a request was submitted to Congress in 1890 to build 35 warships. However, the price tag was a whopping $300 million, which is roughly $6 billion in today's market. Not surprisingly, Congress wasn't interested in spending that much on a fleet. Some members of Congress didn't like the plan because the warships were viewed as weapons to be used in international issues. There were also members of Congress who wanted the US to be a country of isolationism. A compromise was made, and in the end they decided to build 3 battleships at $4 million each. The Massachusetts would be one of the 3 ships. But they also made a decision that was a huge mistake. Instead of having engineers design the ship, they asked a committee to design the Massachusetts. They planned to make a ship with way too many guns and way too much armor. As soon as the Massachusetts was launched, there were major problems. The biggest had to do with the 13-foot guns. There were 4, and each weighed a whopping 136,000 pounds, with shells that weighed over 1,000 pounds each. Moving those guns alone caused the ship to list or tilt to one side and take on water. Having an engineer design the ship would have prevented that issue. However, there were more problems than they'd even realized. The total amount of ammunition needed for the Massachusetts weighed over 100,000 pounds. Also, the coal needed to run the engines weighed 1 million pounds. The ship only traveled at 17 miles per hour, and the armor design for the Massachusetts was absolutely ridiculous. The armor was placed on a low area of the ship where it left some vulnerable spots exposed, so the armor did nothing to protect the ship and crew. The Massachusetts did see action during the Spanish-American War. In 1898, the ship was used in the bombardment of Santiago, Cuba. Then, after the war, there were repairs and upgrades made to the vessel, but still it wasn't enough. In 1910, the Secretary of the US Navy referred to the ship as worthless and obsolete. And from there, the Massachusetts was used for training purposes and was even used as a target for artillery practice at Pensacola Bay in Florida. However, due to artillery practice, the Massachusetts sank in 26 feet of water, where the vessel remains today. These days, the wreck is considered an underwater archaeological preserve at the Fort Pickens State Aquatic Preserve, a favorite spot for divers who visit Pensacola. 4. The Yamato. At nearly 863 feet, the Yamato was one of the biggest battleships not only in World War II history, but also in naval history. The Yamato had a crew of 2,800 to 3,000 men, and it was known as the most comfortable ship in the Japanese Navy. It was even equipped with air conditioning, which was practically unheard of at the time. The ship was so big that the Japanese lacked a shipyard to contain the Yamato. It was armed with massive guns to intimidate the enemy, and in total there were 9 main guns on 3 different turrets. The 18-inch shells they fired could hit targets from 25 miles away, which was pretty incredible for the time. The anti-aircraft guns on the ship were particularly nasty. When fired, a timed fuse in the shell would be triggered. The shell would then explode in the airspace, filling it with burning steel and shrapnel. Additionally, the Yamato was heavily armored. Those who sailed on the battleship claimed that the vessel didn't have any pitch or roll due to its armor. Sailors felt as if they were standing on firm ground while at sea on the Yamato. What's even more impressive though is the fact that the ship could move at 27 knots, or roughly 31 miles per hour. While the Yamato looked like a formidable, massive battleship, it did absolutely nothing when it came to naval battles in the Pacific. In 1942, the Yamato became the flagship for the combined fleet under the command of Japan's Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. But on Christmas Day in 1943, the submarine USS Skate, which was patrolling the waters off Truk Atoll in the Caroline Islands, successfully fired a torpedo at the Yamato and did some damage. It was down, but not out. So, after repairs, the Yamato went into action in the Philippines under the command of Admiral Takeo Kurita. The Yamato was used in the Battle of Samar near the Philippines in October of 1944. The ship saw its first action during the battle and was responsible for sinking an enemy vessel. However, torpedoes were fired at the Yamato and it had to steer away from battle, a fight the ship would never return from. The final voyage of the Yamato was in April of 1945, when it was attacked by American aircraft. Bombs and torpedoes hit the Yamato, and they inflicted a great deal of damage. Some of the damage led to the ammunition stored on the ship igniting, which ultimately sealed the fate of the ship. We don't have to go into much detail for you to imagine what happened next. If you were given the opportunity, what would you name a battleship? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. 3. RMS Lusitania. The RMS Lusitania was a British transatlantic ocean liner that was launched in early June 1906. For some time, it was one of the largest ships in the world at 787 feet in length. Not only was it the largest ship on the ocean, but it was also one of the fastest ships during those days. The Lusitania generally made trips between Liverpool, England, and New York City. It was May of 1915 when the Lusitania was on a voyage from New York City to Liverpool. However, this wasn't the safest of times for ocean liners. Europe was at war. Germany and its allies were in conflict with England, France, and Russia. The United States claimed to be a neutral nation, but it was secretly sending supplies to England using ocean liners. The Germans knew about this plan and decided to take action. The Germans had their U-boats or submarines patrolling parts of the North Atlantic, and they declared the waters around Britain a war zone. 3 months earlier, the Germans said that they would conduct unrestricted submarine warfare in those waters. So, any ship sailing in that area was fair game to be attacked and sunk. The German embassy even placed articles in American newspapers, warning people that if they were going to be sailing to Britain on a ship displaying the British flag, then they were at risk. Some 1,959 people were on the Lusitania when it set sail from New York to Liverpool in May of 1915. That wasn't everything that was on the ship though. The Lusitania had military supplies from the United States for Britain and their allies to use, and this included 173 tons of rifle ammo and shells. The captain of the Lusitania, William Thomas Turner, was told to avoid the waters that separated Ireland from Britain. Also, it was requested that he zigzagged the Lusitania so that U-boats couldn't track his ship. But, disobeying orders, Turner went ahead and sailed into the waters and didn't use a zigzag pattern to avoid U-boats. As a result, a German U-boat spotted the Lusitania off the coast of Ireland on May 7, 1915. A torpedo was fired and it damaged one side of the ship. The torpedo explosion caused a second explosion from the steam engines and made things even worse. The Lusitania sunk in just 20 minutes, claiming the lives of 1,198 people, and of those who perished, 128 were Americans. Many in the United States were outraged by the sinking of the Lusitania, but it would be another 2 years before the United States entered World War I. But unrestricted submarine warfare has been mentioned as one of the factors that drove the US to war. 2. The Bismarck. The battleship Bismarck was Nazi Germany's pride and joy. It was launched in 1939 and was supposed to be their most feared weapon on the seas. The Bismarck was heavily clad and had some impressive firepower. It was also the first battleship built by Germany since World War I. It measured nearly 800 feet in length and had a crew of over 2,000 officers and enlisted men. In May of 1941, the Bismarck was given the mission to destroy ships that were bringing valuable supplies from the United States to Great Britain, codenamed Operation Rheinebong. The British were aware of this mighty ship, and in response, they sent out a search and destroy mission. 10 days after the Bismarck was sent on its mission, it was met by 2 British battleships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Hood. They met in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland. But the Bismarck was caught off guard and a fierce battle began. And as a consequence, the HMS Hood was severely damaged and eventually sank. Although the Bismarck took out one ship, they were facing some problems of their own. The ship was taking in water and they were leaking oil. So, the captain of the Bismarck decided to take the ship back to France, a country that Germany had occupied at the time, for repairs. As the Bismarck tried to make it back to France, British ships were radioed on the position of the weakened ship. All available vessels were then sent to find and destroy the Bismarck. The British sent in bomber planes as well, and the Bismarck was attacked. The HMS Dorsetshire delivered a knockout punch by firing 2 torpedoes at the German battleship. The Bismarck was hit, and the ship sank, claiming the lives of some 2,000 crew members. The mighty German vessel was at sea for 10 days when it finally sank into the Atlantic Ocean. The wreckage of the Bismarck was discovered in 1989, some 400 miles off the coast of the city of Brest in France. The Bismarck's final resting place is some 15,700 feet below the surface. The mighty ship lasted only 10 days at sea, and it took some 48 years for the wreckage to be discovered. 1. The Vasa. The Vasa was built during the 17th century and was supposed to be the greatest ship built for the Swedish Navy. However, it turned out to be an infamous ship that failed to live up to expectations. The story of the Vasa sounds unbelievable, but it's 100% true. King Gustavus II Adolphus of Sweden ordered the construction of the ship around 1624 or 1625. During his reign, Sweden was involved in 3 wars. They were fighting Russia, Denmark, and Poland-Lithuania. King Gustavus II Adolphus wanted Sweden to be a major power, so he ordered 4 ships to be built, and one of them was the Vasa, designed to be the most powerful warship on the planet. King Adolphus was thinking outside of the box when developing the Vasa, understanding the importance of artillery. At the time, the main strategy was to board an enemy ship and capture it. But Adolphus knew battles on the sea would be artillery duels, so he wanted his fleet to be armed with the biggest and best guns. The Vasa construction project ran into some trouble in 1626 when master shipbuilder Henrik Heibertson walked away from the project due to illness. Sadly, he never recovered and he died a year later. Construction continued and the ship was officially launched in 1627. In the end, the Vasa measured 226 feet and was supposed to be the most feared ship on the seas. It was also beautifully decorated. Wooden carvings on the ship depicted stories about the Swedish royal family, especially Gustavus II Adolphus. The Vasa had an astounding 64 cannons, and her maiden voyage was scheduled for August 10, 1628. The ship was tested before its maiden voyage, and there was trouble. An admiral was called to the ship by one of the men in charge of the construction to witness the test. 30 men were to run back and forth on the deck of the Vasa during the test, but when they did this, the ship rolled. The admiral then ordered the men to stop running because he feared it would sink. Despite the problems, though, the Vasa was ordered to set sail in August of 1628. And it would be a voyage few would forget. The maiden voyage of the Vasa was short, but exactly how short was it? The ship sailed less than a mile before tragedy struck. High winds had caused the ship to tilt to the port side or left side, and water rushed into the open gun ports on the vessel. As a result, the ship sank, and that was all she wrote for the Vasa. So what went wrong? In the end, the project was doomed because there was more of an emphasis on firepower and design than seaworthiness. The 64 cannons were too much for the ship, and the weight couldn't be properly supported while on the seas. King Gustavus II Adolphus was furious about the sinking, launching a full investigation into the matter. The surviving officers and crew were questioned, and the shipbuilders were also interrogated. In the end, though, no one was found guilty. However, some blamed the master shipbuilder Henrik Heibertsen. Salvaging attempts were made but failed. The Vasa was brought up for the world to see in 1961, and 1 year later, the public had the chance to see the ship in person. The Vasa is on exhibit today at a museum dedicated to the famed ship in Sweden. Which of these ships do you think was the most impressive? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!